Dear friends, we would like to start. I hope everybody could find a seat in this beautiful room where we are together in Pakhuis de Zwijger. A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pieter Blom. I'm the co-chair together with Dirk of the Sustainable Finance Lab and try to steer you through this afternoon program. This symposium is very, very much in honor of Rens van Tilburg, who's sitting over there. You all know him, and we will hear more from him this afternoon, but also beyond this afternoon, I'm quite sure. He decided after 13 years to make a next step in his career and to stop his activities as an executive director. He's still a member of the Sustainable Finance Lab. We're very happy with that. And because he was our first executive director, it's good to go a little bit back in history. How did it all started and how was the role of Rens? The foundation of the Sustainable Lab was very much a co-creative process. So actually we started with a small group of economists, practitioners, ecologists, including Rens, to organize a series of meetings with the public and people from the financial sector, from politics. That was pretty new at the time because all the banks were hiding because of the financial crisis, and it took us a little bit of extra effort to find the first banker to come on the platform and talk about why his bank was where it was. Koos Timmermans from ING did that. I still remember it. He was a little bit nervous, but in the end it was not too bad after all. We had a good discussion. These public meetings were organized by Rens. Rens was the driving young economist who saw exactly what had to be done, how to get many, many people to these meetings, and we were very happy that he could do it and how successfully he did it. After those meetings, there was a decision we need to do more. We need to create a real lab to do more solid groundwork on this whole transition question of the financial sector. And for that, we needed an executive director. We asked, of course, Rens, because he was the obvious candidate, you can imagine. But we had also some help from Herman Wijfels. And when Herman asks you something, well, who dares to say no then? So that helped a lot to get Rens on board. And he was really the one who created the first years, but later ook with the members, the Sustainable Finance Lab. Now, Rens is very knowledgeable about finance, very knowledgeable about how the context of finance in the broader society is, so he had quite a lot of skills. But what he also had, and I think people will recognize it, he has more than a drive, he has also the courage to really come up with some challenging questions to the current paradigm. And you need quite some courage when you go into discussion with the financial sector, also with politics, but particularly the financial sector, but he did. And while you're doing that, you have to also stay connected, not to lose track, to lose the sector. And I was very happy to see how that works. Very bold in his statement, but at the same time trying to find a real dialogue with the financial sector, what was not always easy, particularly not in the first years after the financial crisis. It was even more challenging also to keep together this group of academic professors in finance who had all their own idea about what was really needed and had their own views. To bring them together in a finance lab is not so easy. I've seen him doing that by respecting everybody fully, but at the same time try to find coalitions between all these different visions. So that was also a skill we very much needed. But if you look at from a higher perspective, you can see on three important points Rens was essential. And I will call it the 3 C's. The first C is about content. If there is anything what Rens brings, he knows content. He knows where he's talking about, he knows the data. He can bring the data up when others had forgotten. And I think that's incredibly important, that a finance lab really have somebody as an executive director who knows the content. But he is also good in the second C, in communication. He's an excellent writer. He had columns in the media. He really brought, also in the report, very clearly forward what has to be done. And I think he was also able to connect, to constantly connect people, the sectors, politics, bring them together. So content, communication, and really connection, making the connection. Those three C's were really needed. What I would like to add personally out of my observations is that Rens is a very friendly person, but also quite a stubborn person. And sometimes, normally he's right to be stubborn, sometimes not, but that we have long discussions, Rens, and he comes back until he's really convinced, but most of the time he's convincing me. So that's a very good quality you need for a lab in this context. So, Rens, I would like to thank you a lot for what you have done to bring really sustainable finance lab where it is now. A respected, institutional, known as an independent think tank, respected for what we have done, and you have really created that in practice. So thank you very much for that. And I'm very happy that you will stay as a member of SFL, and I'm quite sure that even when you're not the director anymore, and we saw it almost in organizing this meeting, you still want to get things done, and that's very good, and we need that. So I hope that you can continue to support us in making the financial sector in support of a just and fair economy. So a big applause in this phase already for you. Then the title of this symposium, Finance in Transition. And what is very important in the title, that it is with a question mark. I think that is really an element of a think tank like SFL, is it half full, half empty, the cup? That's very important to consider. And it's almost every time on the table in SFL. Is it enough what the financial sector is doing? Is it fast enough, what the changes we see? Is it fundamental enough? Are we really looking at the paradigm shift that is needed? And what is that paradigm shift? All those things are quite important. So the whole idea of financing change finance is quite an important aspect of SFL. So financing change we know now. We know many banks, many pension funds, asset managers, they look at more sustainability in their portfolio and they want to make that change. That's happening step by step, not so easy. But changing finance as a system is something different. That requires a new thought of thinking, a different umbrella of looking at things. And I feel that is a very, and will remain, I think, a very important topic for Sustainable Finance Lab in the coming years. So around this theme, finance in transition, question mark, we found some excellent people for a keynote speech, but also in the panel. And I hope you will enjoy this exploration of where we are in this whole question with these different people. It will be moderated by Hans Stegeman later, but the first thing we start with is a keynote from Frank Elderson, who is the Dutch, we said very proudly, director of the European Central Bank. And he will give his perspective from our central bank point of view. Johanna Kellerman, chair of the Dutch Pension Fund for Health and Welfare. Karin Maas, our own Karin Maas, as member of SFL, but also professor at the Erasmus University and the Impact Institute there. And Alexander Barkawi from the Council of Policies in Zurich. He is also here and will bring also some of the international perspective. After the panel, we get another keynote speech from Rens with 40 slides or something like that, Rens. You really want to make the mark very clearly. Last time he can say it, but no, we are really looking forward to that. We really invited you to take the space and bring us a little bit further with your thinking. Because sometimes people think an executive director only manages things and runs things, but the content part, as I said earlier, has been very important. And you have helped us a lot by directing and had really a strong vision of your own. After the panel, we have asked Rens to hand over the baton to his successor, Brenda Kramer, who is working now for the Sustainable Finance Lab for 3 months, almost 4 months. So that's an important symbolic moment. So after the founder, co-founder, executive director to go into a next phase, we really look forward to that. And Dirk, my co-chair, will say a few words more about what we can conclude from this afternoon and how we look into the future. So it will be a nice program, I hope. I hope you enjoy it. There will be interaction, all moderated by Hans Stegeman. And first of all, we get the keynote from Frank. Frank, can I invite you to come here and give your keynote? Thank you.
I know I have to go there. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Rens, for your kind invitation and for all the vitally important work that you have led over the last 10 years, bridging theory and practice to advance sustainable finance. Many great discoveries have been made outside well-controlled laboratory environments. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin when he returned from holiday and found mold growing in a petri dish containing bacteria that he was studying. Henri Becquerel discovered radioactivity by accident after he put the equipment he used to study the relationship between X-rays and sunlight in a drawer on an overcast day. And Archimedes famously had his eureka moment while sitting in a bathtub. Not all eureka moments happen in well-controlled laboratory experiments, but laboratories nevertheless provide an ideal controlled environment to make major discoveries, to develop ideas, to test theories, and to move on from scientific findings to practical solutions for real-world problems. Laboratories provide the bridge from theory to practice, from discovery to application, and from insight to action. Back in 2017, a small group of central banks and supervisors from around the world shared an insight that was relatively novel to them and to their peers. Climate and nature-related risks are a source of financial risks. And this insight was as consequential as it was straightforward. If climate and nature-related risks are a source of financial risks, they fall squarely within the mandate of central banks and supervisors to preserve price stability and to ensure the safety and soundness of banks. In fact, if central banks and supervisors were to disregard climate and nature-related risks, they would run the risk of failing to deliver on their mandates. Eureka. That small group of central banks and supervisors recognized that action was needed if they were to continue delivering on their mandates as the climate and nature crises increasingly affected the economy and the financial system at large. And so the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for Greening the Financial System, the NGFS, was founded in 2017, providing a much-needed laboratory environment for central banks and supervisors working on climate and on nature. And the NGFS was created as a platform to share, develop, and advance practices to incorporate climate and nature-related considerations into the tasks and responsibilities of central banks and supervisors. And importantly, to work closely with academics and stakeholder groups who were already considering the macro-financial consequences of global heating and nature degradation. As was and is being done in the Sustainable Finance Lab. And I still vividly remember the early, always stimulating, thought-provoking and groundbreaking discussions with you, Rens, and with your colleagues back when I was still a board member of the Dutch Central Bank and when we started the platform for sustainable finance here in the Netherlands. Dear memories these are. From that first Eureka moment, it quickly became the globally accepted consensus that climate and nature-related risks fall squarely within the mandates of central banks and supervisors. The NGFS has now grown from those initial 8 members in 2017 to 142 members today. And all these central banks and supervisors from all over the world subscribe to the NGFS stance on the relevance of climate and nature-related risks, and they use the network as a platform to share experiences and best practices. In addition, and to a large extent as a direct result of the NGFS pioneering work, climate-related risks now feature prominently in the work programs of major international standard-setting bodies, such as the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, and the Financial Stability Board. Unfortunately, the same cannot yet be said for nature-related risks. Though a recent stocktake on nature-related risks by the Financial Stability Board showed that a growing number of authorities have been considering the potential implications of nature-related risks for financial stability. In Europe, the relevance of climate and nature-related risks for the economy and the financial system has been explicitly acknowledged by the legislator. The revised Capital Requirements Directive, which provides the regulatory and supervisory framework for banks in Europe, contains a clear reference to climate and nature-related risks. And the European Union's climate objectives are explicitly recognized as part of its general economic policies. Moreover, there is an ever-growing body of evidence showing the macro-financial relevance of climate and nature-related risks. Even if a successful and timely transition requires vast investment flows, analysis consistently shows that the economic benefits of a transition far outweigh the costs. This conclusion holds especially when considered against the alternative scenarios of doing nothing or doing too little, too late. Moreover, if global heating and nature degradation are left unchecked, they will lead to increased macroeconomic volatility as climate and nature events become more severe and more frequent and have a greater impact on the economy, something we are already witnessing today. Regrettably, the prevailing consensus in climate science tells us that the goal of limiting global heating to 2 degrees Celsius, as set out in the Paris Agreement, is not currently being met. Not even close to being met. Last year, the UN Emission Gap Report concluded that the world is on track for an average increase of 2.9 degrees. 2.9 degrees. And even that will only be achieved if all government commitments to mitigation measures are implemented in full and in time. And this means that besides the investment needs for the transition, policymakers also have to be increasingly mindful of the investment needs for adaptation to increase damages from global heating and nature degradation. And to sum up, there is no doubt that the ongoing climate and nature crises go to the heart of central banking and supervision. And that is why the ECB, moving in lockstep with the work being done by the NGFS, international standard-setting bodies, and academia, has been taking action to incorporate climate and nature-related considerations into its monetary policy and its banking supervision. So let me start with the steps that we have taken in the area of monetary policy. When the ECB concluded its strategy review in the summer of 2021, the first review since 2003, the new strategy explicitly acknowledged the profound implications of climate change for the economy and its relevance for monetary policy. And this new strategy came with a concrete climate action plan. And in the 3 years since then, we have made significant progress in improving our ability to take climate considerations into account in the macroeconomic analysis that inform our monetary policy discussions. And we are now better able to assess the economic consequences of the green transition in the euro area using a set of macroeconomic models. Moreover, we are identifying physical risks that are already posing risks to price stability. We found, for instance, that increases in food prices following extreme heat waves were an upside risk to price stability. And this risk has featured explicitly in our monetary policy assessment and communication in recent quarters. With respect to our monetary policy instruments, in October 2021, we started tilting our reinvestments of corporate bonds towards issuers with a better climate performance. And this enables us to avoid undue exposures to climate-related risks that are detrimental to price stability, and to align the way we conduct our monetary policy more closely with the EU's general economic policies. As of July 2023, we suspended bond purchases under our asset purchase program, including corporate bonds, to help bring inflation back to our 2% target. But we are still applying the tilting strategy in the partial reinvestments of maturing bonds in the context of our pandemic emergency purchase program, the PEP, until these reinvestments are also discontinued as intended at the end of this year. Now, if any corporate bond purchases were needed for monetary policy purposes in the future, the established direction of the tilt would set the minimum benchmark. In addition to our bond holdings, we are also looking at the collateral framework that we apply in relation to banks' participation in our lending operations. As an early outcome of this work, in 2021, we started to accept sustainability-linked bonds as collateral, provided that they meet eligibility criteria. And we've also decided that only assets that comply with the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directives will remain eligible once this directive enters into force. And we are continuing to explore options to further incorporate climate considerations into our collateral framework. And to this end, we are working with relevant authorities such as the European Securities and Markets Authority and the European Banking Authority to encourage better disclosures from collateral issuers and in turn facilitate a better assessment of climate-related risks. Our current actions aim to support a high degree of confidence in the alignment of our activities with the goals set by the Paris Agreement within our mandate. However, the decarbonization path for our monetary policy assets remains dependent on actions that are not fully under our own control, including the decarbonization efforts made by the issuers of the bonds that we hold. And this is one of the main reasons why we have committed to regularly reviewing all our measures to assess their impact. And if necessary, we will adapt them to ensure that they continue to fulfill their monetary policy objectives and support the decarbonization path to reach the goals set by the Paris Agreement and the EU's climate neutrality objectives. Within our mandate, we will also look into addressing additional nature-related challenges. And this process will be fully guided by our monetary policy strategy. Specifically, whenever we have a choice between two instruments or two different calibration of instruments, that both are equally conducive to maintaining price stability, we are legally obliged to choose the one that at the same time best supports the general economic policies in the EU. This is the killing two birds at the same time doctrine. This implies that whenever we adjust the calibration of our instruments, we must choose the option that supports our decarbonization path unless our proportionality assessment shows that there are other less intrusive ways of achieving price stability. Looking ahead, besides the adjustments that we are already implementing, this strategic commitment may require us to consider two further avenues. The first concerns our public sector bond holdings. Here, our reasoning is very similar to that applied to our corporate bond holdings. Presently, most of our monetary policy assets are bonds issued by governments of EU member states. However, the climate and nature-related risk intensity of these bonds is not obvious, as there is currently no clear and reliable framework to assess their compatibility with the Paris Agreement. At the same time, since the pandemic, the universe of supranational bonds issued by EU institutions has increased significantly, with green bonds now making up a relatively large share. So in my view, when there is no clear monetary policy rationale for preferring domestic sovereign bonds, we should contemplate increasing the share of EU supranational bonds in our total bond holdings to minimize potential climate and nature-related risks and to better align our balance sheet with the general economic policies in the EU. This would be relevant if we had to consider new bond purchases in the future, obviously. But it is also relevant for the composition of the structural bond portfolio that will be part of our new operational framework as announced earlier this year. Second, and this is the part you're going to like, Rens. Second, if there is a monetary policy need to reconsider targeted longer-term refinance operations, TLTROs, for banks in the future, there are compelling reasons to seriously consider greening these TLTROs. After all, the ECB has in the past adopted a similar approach by incorporating financial stability considerations into the design of these instruments. As of the third series of these TLTROs, which was launched in 2019, the TLTROs featured a lending target that excluded housing loans to limit the risk of real estate bubbles forming. So similar targeting strategies can be considered to support green lending or exclude non-green lending in the future, provided an efficient validation process can be found. A new paper published by the Sustainable Finance Lab just two days ago, I think it was, aims to contribute to identifying this. So let me now move to steps that we are taking in banking supervision. And I'll just... This part is shorter. Since the ECB published a guide setting out our supervisory expectations for banks' risk management practices in 2020, we have consistently taken climate and nature-related risk into account into our supervision. Our guide outlines the ECB's understanding of the safe and prudent management of climate and nature-related risks under the current prudential framework. And we have now carried out a number of supervisory exercises to assess banks' approaches to managing these risks against our expectations, as published in that guide in 2020. Following these horizontal exercises, we have repeatedly urged banks to ensure the sound management of climate and nature-related risks, using our expectations as a starting point. In other words, we expect banks to manage climate and nature-related risks just like any other material risk that they are exposed to. Considering the requirements clearly set out in the Capital Requirements Directive as implemented into national law, and considering the need for banks to implement a regular process for identifying all material risks, banks must ensure that practices are in place for the sound management of climate and nature-related risks. And they must do so by the end of 2024. And we have also set interim deadlines for banks to remediate certain shortcomings related to the management of these risks. And these deadlines, by the way, were informed by what the banks themselves considered reasonable when we first started discussing climate and nature-related risk management with them. However, our first two interim deadlines have now passed, and a number of banks did not deliver. As a basic starting point for managing any type of risk, we asked banks to perform an adequate materiality assessment of the impact of climate and nature-related risk across their portfolio by March 2023. Almost a year ago, just over 6 months after that deadline expired, we announced that a number of banks had not yet satisfactorily delivered on this. And consequently, 28 banks, of the about 110 banks that are under our direct supervision, 28 banks received binding supervisory decisions. And out of those, 22 were told that if they didn't remedy their shortcomings by a certain date, they would incur a periodic penalty payment for every day the bank remains in breach of that requirement. Now, encouragingly, most banks have now submitted a meaningful materiality assessment, which shows that our supervisory efforts have been effective in almost all cases. For the banks where this is not yet the case, the process is ongoing to determine whether penalties will be charged. Now, for the second interim deadline, we asked banks to clearly include climate and nature-related risk in their governance, strategy, and risk management by December 23. And as with the first interim deadline, most banks have made progress, and frameworks for climate and nature-related risks are now broadly in place. This progress notwithstanding, weaknesses in banks' practices remain and have been communicated in further feedback letters. And a small group of outliers, in that small group, foundational elements for the adequate management of climate and nature-related risks are still missing. And these banks are now receiving binding supervisory decisions outlining the potential of periodic penalty payments if they fail to timely deliver on these requirements. And to avoid any doubt, we will proceed in exactly the same way with respect to the third and final deadline at the end of this year. By then, we want to see that banks' risk management practices ensure the sound management of climate and nature-related risk across all areas of our supervisory expectations. And thereafter, banks will have to keep updating their practices in accordance with advances in data availability, methodologies, and legislative and regulatory requirements. Banks need to ensure that their risk management practices are and continue to be commensurate with the magnitude of the climate and nature crises and risks that they face. And as supervisors, it's our job to ensure that they do. And to achieve this, we will use, obviously, always in a proportionate manner, all supervisory instruments that we have at our disposal. Let me conclude. The impact of the climate and nature crises on the world, and therefore also on the economy, will be increasingly profound. And while we should continue to push for an orderly and full transition, it is becoming increasingly likely that we will ultimately see a combination of disorderly transition and further increasing physical damages due to the climate and nature crisis. And it implies that the world in which we live and in which central banks and supervisors pursue their mandate will see further increases in uncertainty. The perhaps most renowned laboratory scientist in human history, Marie Sklodowska-Curie, once remarked that nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. And she went on to say that now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. And in light of the ongoing climate and nature crisis, I would add that now is the time to understand more so that we can act more. NGOs and academics, think tanks like the Sustainable Finance Lab play a critical role in advancing the frontier of our understanding and in pushing for action. Beste Rens, against this backdrop, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your unrelenting push. In the pursuit of their mandate, central banks and supervisors are forward-looking and science-based institutions. And we have understood, Eureka, that the climate and nature crises require us to look further than ever before, beyond our familiar horizon. We are learning to update our models and analytical tools with insights from academic areas beyond economics and finance. We are adapting our instruments to incorporate climate and nature-related considerations. It is our task, it is our commitment, and it is our mandate. Thank you.
Yes, first, maybe introduce myself. Hans Stegeman, Chief Economist, Triodos Bank, and now a moderator. And I was wondering, Frank, that meeting of the NGFS, the first one, when you had that Eureka moment, was it in a swimming pool? No, probably not. You don't have to answer that one. Another one. That question mark on finance in transition, there's a funny story. We were upstairs doing our headset, Rens and I, and there was no question mark then. But because Peter would say something about the question mark is in. But so the question for you, is there still a question mark in finance in transition? Because you give a complete story on all what happened, especially from a central banking perspective. But is it enough, or do we still have a question mark?
So the first meeting of the NGFS, let me just say that for a second, it took place in a windowless room, very small, in the Banque de France. And I remember we were all sitting, and whenever I'm there, then sometimes I go in there and I sneak in there for a moment so I hear it all start. I think there needs to be a question mark and an exclamation mark, probably. There has been a lot of progress. But we, humankind, is behind the curve. So all the things that are good,
should ideally have been happening 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So that would be my short answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let's go to the panel. So I want to welcome Johanna Kellerman, Karen Maas, and Alexander Barkawi on the stage. Please, a hand for them. So you can go anywhere you want. And what we're going to do, there is strict instructions from Rens, no interaction with the audience now. Yeah, if you saw what happened just before, everyone got very strict instructions what to do. So all here had calls with Rens beforehand what to do. So what we're going to do is short pitches where everyone gives his or her perspective on finance in transitions. And then we have a panel discussion about the topic, both from more practitioner part and also from supervisory and central banking part. So let's start with Karen, introduced before already as Professor of Accounting and Sustainability and Academic Director of the Impact Center Erasmus.
Thank you, yes.
I have to click something, right?
Yeah, well, I was allowed to only bring one slide, so that's what I will show you. We have seen that the mission statements of a lot of financial institutions have been moved over the past year. So they moved away from finance first, which is actually the first business model. And now a lot of financial institutions, they don't promise to gain a lot of money, but they also want to be in that transition and they also want to have that positive impact on society. Because where we invest our money in, that's what we will create. So in wording, we have indeed achieved a lot already. So the ambitions are high, but in practice, unfortunately, not everyone is living up to their promises. And it's also very difficult to do. So we see a lot of action going on, but there's also a lot of decoupling between the promises made, the actions done, but the performance achieved. And although the intentions are there, and a lot of institutional investors, but also other financial institutions, they do a lot of things, but there are very strong hurdles that they really have to step over. So the first I would like to say is that we really are waiting too long for the perfect measurement to be there. So if there is a biodiversity fund or if there is a climate fund and we really promise impact, we also should be able to assess the impact we're having. And not only the impact of climate change or biodiversity on our investment, but also the impact of our investment on biodiversity and climate change. So we need to do some assessment. But then, during the interviews, during the discussions I have with practitioners, they say, yeah, but it's so hard because the data is not there. And how can we take it into account if we cannot measure it? And I would say we should just start doing it and try to assess it in a very simple way, even with pluses or minuses or high impact or low impact. So we should start doing and assessing something. The second hurdle that investors are facing is actually that they have to implement it in every step in the investment or banking or lending process. And I think we're doing a great job to predict upfront what will happen with the impact, but we never assess afterwards what actually has happened. And therefore, we are not learning fast enough. We are not spreading the wording fast enough. We should really try to change that. And the third hurdle is really, we speak a lot about dilemmas and strategic discussions that are very hard, and it's always weighing finance and impact. But it's not a dilemma, it's just a decision we have to make. And if we promise to have this positive impact, we should make this positive impact, and we should actually work towards it. So I would like to take away the question mark, and I think we have done a great job with explaining why financial institutions are important. I think financial institutions have taken a great step to show what they can do, but now we have to solve the how. How are we actually getting this into account and being able to steer upon it? So take away the question mark.
Okay, thank you. Take away the question mark. And you said it's not a dilemma, it's a decision.
Yes.
And we have to figure out the how. But why is then still so much money going to unsustainable activities if we know how to do it?
No, well, we don't know how to do it. So we don't know. We do know what has to be done, and I think most of the organizations agree. Yeah. But they always hide because the how is not that clear yet. So how can we measure it? How can we take it into account? We are not sure what would be the right way. And by the way, it's always finance against impact, and we need to steer on finance. I would say, yes, of course, finance is important, but if you promise impact, so if you move away from finance first to having a positive impact, we should also assess impact and achieve impact, because otherwise it's just wording without any content.
Yeah. Yes, agree. Okay, we come back to that later. Let's first go to Johanna Kellerman, Chair of PFZW, Pension for the Fund of Healthcare Sector. Also for you, a small pitch about how did you see, we need to back the question mark, because without a question mark, and maybe that's also the question, what do you think about the question mark?
What do I think about the question mark? Well, first of all, let's also face the fact that everything is in transition. I think Frank has set that out very clearly. Our world is in transition, so by necessity, finance should be in transition, albeit late. Secondly, to answer your point, where are we in the transition? How did we get here? Where do we come from? Where are we going to? I also see it in parallel with my personal journey. 25 years ago, I worked in the city amidst the investment bankers doing CLOs of CLOs. And at a certain point, it became increasingly difficult to explain what I was doing, but also why I was doing it. And I think that is a feeling that many in the financial sector had. So what we're seeing is finally a move in finance from financial risk and return to social risk and return. I think we are starting to discover that, and I think the good thing is that this is no longer a controversial discussion. As you can see, we're sitting here out in the open. We're no longer in small rooms having to beg DNB, can the Sustainable Finance Lab please have a room? We don't have anywhere else to go. That is all behind us. So that's all on the plus side. At PFZW, we're also in that transition, and against the backdrop of this entire transition that we're facing, we're moving our entire portfolio from a 2D perspective to a 3D perspective. And that means that we try to fully integrate all dimensions of, risk, return, and sustainability and impact into our investment process, in our investment beliefs, in our asset management, in our asset liability management, our asset allocation, the mandates, everything. That is, of course, quite a task. That is quite a transition, I would say. It has 4 phases. And the first phase is knowing really what we own. We come from a world where we were a passive investor, having, more than 10,000 names in our portfolio. And this knowing what you own clearly means that we will start moving towards a more focused portfolio with less names. It is just as well, because we've noticed that with the increasing scrutiny we face from stakeholders, We just want to know what we own, but also we want to know why we own it and why we should continue to own it. So that is the first phase. We need to fully understand the names in our portfolio and justify why we invest in those. That answer, that justification, will have to be along the three lines. So the line of risk, the line of return, and the line of impact. We also want to understand the risks that are, what you could say, not yet financial, or long-term financial risk, i.e. climate and nature-related risks. And also, let's not forget the S and the G related risks. So the second stage is that we're raising the minimum standards of what we want to invest in. And that is also quite a step, as you know, because we're all struggling with imperfect data. And this is clearly one area where we're struggling with that. In the third phase, we try to look at our entire investment portfolio and start aligning it really in a positive way. So from, do no harm towards making an impact, do the right thing, aligning them with the SDGs and with the Paris Accord. That is, of course, all, a big exercise. It's not just an exercise on paper, but it's also a big exercise in practice. But then the really tricky step is the fourth step. That is making that real world impact and setting targets, measuring and trying to meet those too. Which is why we have tasked our asset manager, PGGM, with targets for instance, the energy transition, or the health transition that we're also facing, with impact targets for nature and biodiversity yet to follow. So clearly, this is not an easy task. It is quite ambitious. It is also, I can tell you, rather scary, because we're entering uncharted territory and we will have to find out many things as we go along the way. But we believe that in the end, we will create long-term value, and that is the whole point of being a pension fund. We are there for the long term. We are there for our participants who aren't even born yet, and we have to create that long-term value for their old age. At the same time, it's equally important that we stay close to the preferences of our current participants, and that is another area where we need to do a lot of communication, where we need to stay close to them, and where we also, and that is also new, want to be closer at home. So we have dedicated parts of our portfolio to investments close at home in the Netherlands, so that we can actually show and make people feel that their money is working for them and for their future and for the future of their children. Yep. So let me stop there. Can we yet remove the question mark? I certainly hope so. Again, I always look for the exclamation mark, because I think there's still a lot of work to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think from Karen we heard the how, and from you we heard the why in the beginning in your own career, but also in the end when you say the people, so the deelnemers, the participants, yes, sorry for that, need to understand how the value is created and how they receive it. So I think the why in finance, also in finance in transition, is also very important to understand where we should go to. Do you think they understand?
It depends. Our participants, when we ask them to make a list of their priorities, their priority is not climate. No. Their priority is not, to step out of fossil investments. There are, they're care and healthcare workers, so they care about smoking, gambling, which is why we stopped investing in the gambling industry. They care about alcohol. They want us to stop investing in alcohol. And then we say, well, you remember during COVID, it was a good idea to use alcohol for your hands. Oh yeah, well, that's also a good idea. You know, yeah, I think it's a dialogue, because we do see the need to reach the Paris Accord goals, which is why you know, we've also put in our own preferences as a board, and I personally think that that is also, you know, the job of a board. But at the same time, you have to stay close and to stay in contact.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to our last presenter, Alexander Bakari, founder and director of the Council of Economic Policies. Your perspective, and of course the same question, what do you think?
I'll come back to that at the very end, if I may. I don't come with a slide, but with 4 hopes. So the first hope is that, Rens, you stay in this space. You've had an impressive contribution, and I hope that wherever you land, that our paths will cross off often. All the other 3 hopes are on us. This one is on you. So my second hope is a bit, I think, related to what you said, Karen, that we move faster from diagnosis to action. And I think, Frank, you said it brilliantly a year ago at a meeting in Paris where you gave the analogy of an action movie, where things build up and you see the SWAT team coming up, and that's Frank's words, right? And the police, and then you got the terrorists somewhere, and then someone says, go, 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 go. Again, your words. And they go. But that's not what's happening in this space. You mentioned 2017, when you had your Eureka moment. Absolutely, we've made progress, and I'm sure you are as impatient about these things as I am and as we are. But we are not even close to a go, 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 go moment. And I'll try to give you an illustration of every single hope I've brought along. And here, very concretely, since you mentioned the collateral framework, Frank. So imagine any financial market actor says, I've identified a significant material risk on my balance sheet in 2017. 7 years later, we have still no integration of climate risks in the collateral framework of the ECB. And I think it started when the ECB said, we'll first introduce it into our eligibility criteria. So what can we accept as collateral? That was taken off the table. Haircuts were taken off the table. So I think it's an illustration of where there is a huge disconnect between the diagnosis and the action, but not just at the ECB. I think we're in a process where we are too focused on models, on scenarios, on disclosure. I think there's enough data, as you said, Karen, to act, and we need to really act now. The second hope I have is that we restrike the balance in the supervision or the regulation of this sector with regard to sustainability in terms of how prescriptive we are and how many judgment calls we leave to the financial sector. Sustainability, climate change on its own, but sustainability in a broad sense even more, is a really complex issue. And I think we can only solve this issue or address it with a financial market that constantly exercises its role of capital allocation based on judgment calls. If we go down to the level, Frank, you mentioned the paper that was just published this week by the SFL. I was really struck by reading that. There's a footnote in there that talks about the taxonomy that says, there's a criteria somewhere in the taxonomy that says, if the toilet flush uses more than 6 liters in the maximum flush and more than 3.5 liters on average, then it doesn't fulfill the do no significant harm criteria and therefore cannot be considered green. I think that's crazy. and in my view, I know this might not be popular here, I think the taxonomy as it's currently being used is a dead end. And I think we have to really turn around and think again on how we find smart intervention points that allow the millions of people that make judgment calls every day in financial markets to make these judgment calls. My third hope, and that's where I get back to the question mark, I think it's an exclamation mark, but not in the sense that you discussed earlier. Financial markets are transitioning. The only question is, where do they transition to? Mm-hmm. And therefore, my third hope is that we expand our discussion on what sustainability in finance means, because it's much broader than just climate change. And again, to illustrate to you what I mean, I was roughly a year ago at the annual meeting of the Swiss Sustainable Finance Association. And you may remember, around a year ago, that was 6 months after the fall of Credit Suisse. A whole afternoon with a discussion on sustainable finance, going into the details of carbon credit markets, biodiversity credit markets, not one mention of Credit Suisse. I also think that's crazy. And the SFL has in its mission statement, robust and stable financial markets. That's how it starts. If we don't have robust and stable financial markets, no way we're going to address anything of the other things. So my last hope is, let's expand the conversation beyond climate and biodiversity and think about the broader objective of sustainability in the financial system. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So we have an exclamation mark, a question mark. I think we have a lot to talk about. I think also you two have a lot to talk about. But let's first start with going into the financial sector itself, and then we come to regulation and central banking policy. So I want to start, and you already gave some notes on what the how and the why and what you're doing. But the big question is still how to make impact an integral element of the financial trade-off, like you try to do, like you also try to show. And if we want, so we will now also start a little bit more forward-looking. So we know everything, there's a lot of things are going wrong. What should happen in an ideal world to take those extra steps? So from a financial institution perspective, so the data, what can you do? So maybe to start with Johanna, because you're busy with it, and you take those steps. What do you need to accelerate? And you need to use the mic.
Sorry. Well, the first answer is courage. Like I said, we're entering uncharted territories. We're in areas where, there's no 30-year history of textbooks and formulas to just prove that we have the right tracking error, so we're okay. And fortunately, the academic body of work is growing fast, not least thanks to many people here in the room. But I think that's very important. That we're not yet on a solid foundation in terms of data, but also not in terms of let's say the theoretical basis. We know this, we want this, we know it's necessary, but it's early days.
But is that realistic to? Because we have built a system based on, well, models that are quite linear in their expectations, and we think that it works, at least with our expectations and how we make investment decisions. But if we accept that the world is non-linear, complex, and that we don't know, does it help to do more research to guide decisions? This is my judgment, of course. I know, but
I don't think it's for me to answer that question. But yes, certainly, I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of, well, exactly what we're doing here. Practitioners, regulators, central bankers, and academia working together on this. So I think in that sense we're on the right track. But we all know it's still early days of actually.
And let me try another, because I think this is important. You started with courage, and I'm a little bit afraid sometimes that it depends more on courage than on data or research that we get in the end, because we have to make those decisions, and before we have the evidence, it can take years. But maybe, Karen.
Yes, of course we need the data, but we should have courage to start, because without starting there will be no data, so there will only be predictions. And we need to move beyond predictions, because the predictions we know, and everyone is giving us beautiful predictions, because we are saving the world already if we could believe what they are promising. Yeah. So we need courage to start doing it, but then we need to track and trace, and we need to learn from it. We need to build evidence. We need to do more research. So we really have to take this one step further.
And maybe what you say that was also in your points, that what you see is the reporting on sustainability is improving, but the management of sustainability, of impact, is almost non-existent.
It's almost non-existing, yeah. So we report about what we have done. Yeah. We already know what we have done, but we don't report about what we have achieved, and also not what didn't go well, how we have learned from it, how we adapted the system. So really this internal learning system we should build upon. And we are doing this based on financial data every day, all the time. That's what we do when we invest. But we should just plug in the other, the E and the S, and then also do the same, learn from it and build up this evidence to be able to make better predictions tomorrow.
Yeah. And maybe also one of the challenges, of course, for the financial system itself is that we see a short-term versus a long-term. A short-term in terms of making those decisions, and if the benchmark goes the other way, even if you don't use a benchmark yourself, another one uses the benchmark and say, hey, you're underperforming, and what are you going to do? And I'll come back to you, Johanna. What are you going to do then? Because I think this is one of the biggest challenges also for your participants. So if you have 1 year or 2 years of underperformance because you make longer-term choices, which you are convinced and you have the courage to make them, what are you going to do to explain to your participants, yes, these are 2 years that are worse, but we do it for the long term?
That's true, and in all fairness, that's what we've always said. Huh? I mean, we've always been long-term investors, and we've always tried to focus on the long term, and we should keep doing that. I just think that it could help, like I said, to also show that investing is not just something you do on the stock exchange of Hong Kong or Shanghai, but it can also be something close to home, where you invest in, you know, an old-age neighborhood with, you know, renovating sustainable buildings. So, as with many things, communicating is a constant process, and that is just a challenge we're facing. We've always faced, and we continue to face. I do expect, however, that with the transition of the pension system, which is also in transition in the Netherlands, we will see more scrutiny, because people will probably be much more interested in their own, you know, individual financial return of their portfolio, and it is up to us to show them that that is important, but that there's also more in terms of return, risk, and impact.
Agree. Let's go also a little bit to the central banking supervisory perspective, and maybe start with the supervisory perspective. Maybe a question for I think you should ask each other. You already asked some questions to Frank, so I would invite you to start also the points you made already to Frank. So let's start with your regulation point. I think that's interesting. So the balance in regulation is, I think, an important point, and I to some extent agree with you that taxonomy, is it really helpful? We have the data, so we can use it. That's a fair point. But if it really, does it really help to steer finance in a different direction? So maybe Frank, you can react.
Well, I think this is a very, very important question. So for me, there's a preceding question, and that is the one whether you can have a green financial system in a non-green world. And I think basically the answer to that question is you cannot. So what we need is someone who directs the tempo of the symphony that we are playing together. And that is governments. They agree on the Paris Agreement. They agree on the climate law. They agree on the reforestation law. They and that is us again, of course. But until such time as we don't say, as of this day, there will be no more diesel cars on the streets of Amsterdam, there will be no more coal-fired engine plants, you name it, those will be there and therefore be financed.
Yeah.
So the first question is, who marks the pace? And that can, so yes, the financial sector is a conditio sine qua non to make sure that we can finance the transition, but it cannot go much faster. Maybe sometimes you can push, and of course we try to do. Okay, that's one. Two, I very much agree with what you said, Alexander. There are some international public goods that without these being delivered, this whole thing will never work. So we need price stability. We need financial stability. So what I've been trying to say when I was standing there was that that is something that we take very seriously, and we have now learned that part of that, not only, but part of us delivering these public goods can only be done if we take all this into consideration. So you can no longer go back to the citizens and say, here, we are doing all we can to deliver price stability and financial stability, but hey, we ignore the risk of climate and nature change. So that is what we can deliver. Now, in doing so, we can help, and now I'm talking supervision, as you mentioned supervision, we can help bring banks in a position that they can manage these related risks well, but not just for the sake of managing these risks. It will put banks in a situation that they can actually assume these risks, take these risks in a controlled manner, in an adequate manner, and they have to, because otherwise this transition and the adaptation will never be financed. So the role of the supervisor is, in a certain extent, an indirect one. We cannot say to banks, get out of coal. That is for governments to do. But we can say, if you want to finance coal, you manage your risk around it well. Yep. And that, of course, puts pressure on banks to put pressure on their clients. So there is leverage that we have. Actually, there's double leverage, if you like, from us on the banks, on the clients being the real economy. In terms of what we can do on the central bank side, I want to manage a little bit expectations that, of course, we have to, as I said before, we have to make sure that in our modeling, in our projections, we take all this on board. We are trying to do this as well as we can. We have to make sure that we protect our own balance sheet, because this balance sheet is necessary to be able to deliver that public good, which is price stability. Of course, there are risks on that balance sheet, which are climate and nature related, and we have to take that into account. It's not easy, but we have to do that. There are other things that we can do. I mentioned the tilting. I mentioned the compelling reasons, as I functioned it, to maybe at one point when we come to the conclusion on monetary policy grounds that it is a good idea to have another TLTRO to take into account. But all these things, in the end, will not make up for governments marking the pace. So even if central banks did all the things that Rens, in all his wildest dreams, has ever thought of,
I don't know about Rens.
And these, by the way, would be all Lex Hoogduin's wildest nightmares, I can tell you. But even if he did that,
okay,
don't fool yourself.
No.
It would be other actors that would have to mark that pace.
Yeah, I'm getting visions of Rens and Lex in swimming pools, but no, you started very fundamentally in saying, so, and that relates, of course, to that question. So what's the role in finance itself in a transition? To what extent can finance, so either via supervisors or monetary, but also courage and taking decisions, steer a transition? And I agree to a certain extent that yes, it's in the end finance in the real economy, so something should happen there. However, I think there's also a moral role of the financial sector to do the right thing. So, this is also my opinion. Sorry, this is not my role as moderator.
I've been talking a lot, so I hesitate to take up the microphone again. But I want to mention one more thing that has not been mentioned yet today. And now that you say there might be a moral obligation, I want to add something. There might be a legal obligation. So today, in the Netherlands, in Europe, as far as I know, in no other jurisdiction, there is no specific law that says that firms and financial firms need to be on a Paris-compatible transition path. So if you today, as a bank, want to specialize in financing coal, that's perfectly legitimate.
Yep.
We, as a supervisor, will say you have to manage all the risk there, but there is no law that we can invoke to say this is illegal. Now, as we all know in this room, there is the Urgenda case. And in the Urgenda case, the Dutch state was found breaching human rights by not being on a Paris-compatible path. There is the Shell case. Now, I cannot comment on any ongoing court cases, but I can say that we know what the outcome was in first instance. And in first instance, there was a legal obligation found to be in existence today on the basis of higher human rights law that puts Shell Oil Company on a Paris-compatible transition path obligation, because if they do not do that, according to that case law, which is not the Supreme Court, as we all know, but still, would be a breach of human rights and therefore a tort, and therefore they can be ordered to be on a Paris-compatible path. We all know about ING. If this case law were to be confirmed by the Dutch Supreme Court, by maybe other Supreme Courts in other jurisdictions, there is already today a legal obligation for firms to be on a Paris-compatible path. That means that if you say, I want to be a bank that invests in coal because I'm just very good at managing the risk about it, you might be breaching human rights already today. Yep. And that is something that I'm now telling banks to take very seriously. So I asked a number of CEOs of the big banks to say, could you please do a little bit of homework, go to your general counsels and ask them to tell you about your agenda case. And I will tell you that they will tell you that they don't know yet. But give them 2 weeks. Give them 2 weeks and come back and start thinking about the possibility that you're already today under that legal obligation. And that changes everything, because then suddenly it is no longer that we all have to wait for governments to mark the pace, but the pace has already been set.
Yes. Yes.
That's a big difference.
And I think that's a big difference. Yes, thanks. Let's go to Alex. What struck me in your hopes was that it ended very negatively, by the way. But well, your hopes in your pitch.
What was the last one?
No, they all ended. The last one, exclamation mark, that we should interpret negatively.
No. Okay, then
You need to. Yeah.
So my point on the exclamation mark was there is more to the transition than what we're talking about when we use that term.
Yeah.
There is a transition towards potentially a digital central bank currency. There's a complete replumbing of the financial system. And if we just focus on biodiversity carbon credits, then I think we're missing the big picture.
Apologies. My interpretation was because you were talking probably about the infrastructure of the financial system, where there are some worrying signals there. So my interpretation was that it was not so positive.
No, I'm very hopeful on all these hopes. If I may touch a little bit on the supervisory side of things, and as a side note, also make clear that I believe the ECB is at the absolute forefront of all these things. If I look at the country where I'm based, Switzerland, we're not even close to the things that the ECB is doing. And just to mention a few further things, also you were talking about your portfolio, right? The Swiss National Bank has one of the largest equity portfolios worldwide. It is not voting its shares, right? The Bank of Japan has a large equity portfolio. It's not voting its shares, or at least I think it lets BlackRock do the votes. So coming back to the earlier the point that you made, I think you're totally right. Monetary policy can't solve it all, but neither any other policy field. We need to acknowledge in everything we're talking about, there are no silver bullets. Yeah? We also work on fiscal and trade policy in addition to monetary. And regardless of the policy field that we engage in, we always have people that will say, well, if you just had a carbon tax, for example. No, it doesn't come down to an instrument. It comes down to a policy mix where every single policy field needs to be aligned with the broader goals, which, by the way, is also why I don't like the term climate policy. We're mixing up policy fields and types of instruments with goals, right? There's monetary policy, there's fiscal policy. You would never have a fiscal policy maker saying, no, I'm just here to raise revenues, right? Don't talk to me about anything else, right? every single policy field has a whole range of objectives that they need to be aligned with, and the same holds true for monetary policy and financial supervision. So maybe one last point on financial supervision, because also there I think the ECB was the push for this is what we expect, and we'll be having fines or even capital add-ons if these expectations are not met. I would love to see more of this worldwide. To my knowledge, this is the only the only supervisor that does that. And I therefore also have this is more a plea than a hope, a plea to the banking sector to support that. Because what my impression is what is happening, let's say in Switzerland, that you have banks saying, super important, this is really material stuff. But don't you, supervisor, dare give us capital add-ons if we face these risks, right? And I think that's just hypocritical. Yeah? It's also hypocritical to have climate risk funds in the asset management business and then say, yeah, but we don't have the data for you to regulate us on that. You know, banks can't have it both ways. They can't, they also, and then I'll stop, they can't also just say, you know, regulation should be hands-off, but then the legal department goes and says, yeah, but you need to really define these terms for us. We need to know what you mean when you say transition or whatever. Either we work in a world where there can be judgment calls, but then there are judgment calls from all sides, or it becomes prescriptive. Yeah. And I think if it becomes prescriptive, it's a real dead end.
Yeah, yeah, good point, good point. We have 2 minutes left because we know Rens has 40 slides. So I want to have from all of you, we talk a lot about the question mark, the exclamation mark. We're not going to solve it, but at least one idea, a positive one. What would speed up this transition, either with a question mark or an exclamation mark? Who will start? Who wants to think? So one idea. Frank is smiling. He wants to start.
It feels very unoriginal, but I'm actually very impressed with what Alexander said. There is no silver bullet. All policy areas need to work from that one vision, and I think that's a very important idea. So if that's the only idea that is being given to the audience today, I think it's a good one.
Well, I think the same counts for financial institutions. So there is no one silver bullet. So we should cooperate much more, but also share results, share evaluation results, share evidence. So build up this knowledge.
Learn together.
Learn together.
So taking it to the other side, to the super concrete, if I had one wish from this type of conversation, it would be for central banks to integrate climate risk into considerations into their collateral frameworks. I think that's the big thing in terms of their toolbox that we need to address.
Okay, thank you. Johanna?
Yeah, I would take that one step further, because we don't only need policies, we also need markets to adapt and come to true prices. And factoring in, the green elements into the collateral will impact the price, finally. And I think that's what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you all. All good ideas to end with. May I have a hand for the panel? Because we need to be strict. And we need a picture. Of course, now is the big moment, because now we get all the answers, I think, about the question mark and the exclamation mark. So the floor is for Rens.
Thank you very much, Hans. Thank you very much, panelists, for a great panel, and Peter for your kind words. I'm not going to talk too much about history, because I wanted to look forward. But maybe one little remembrance I have, Frank, it was when you said that we started the platform for sustainable finance, which was a lot of joy. At least I think I really enjoyed having Frank chairing those meetings with a lot of people in the room who were maybe rather would have been somewhere else. And with every time Frank ending that conversation, well, there was enough talk here to have another meeting. And then we scheduled another meeting and, well, and see what's happening now. We've got a whole range of working groups doing great work there. Yeah, and thank you all so much for coming. It's really special to have a room like this, full of faces. And I know everyone. And have fond memories with each and every one of you. Also the ones with, I know, where's Lex? I think somewhere there. We don't always agree, but the good thing is, from these honest conversations, it really works as a big inspiration for me. So I want to thank you all so much for that. And thank you for coming here to celebrate my 14 years with Sustainable Finance Lab, which started 14 years ago with an email. And it was said, nobody refuses anything to Herman Wijfels. But I got this email and it was an invitation to come to study the implications of the current financial system for sustainability. And well, of course, I went there and we sat around the table with 15 people, all a little bit like, why am I here? And we were looking and we were discussing even whether sustainability was really something that had to do something with finance. And when we then found our name, Sustainable Finance Lab, a lot of people from the financial sector said, well, you're really defining yourself into a very small niche. Why are you doing that? Because who's interested in that combination of sustainability and finance? And look now here, 14 years later, this whole room filled with, I would say, serial entrepreneurs in sustainable finance. People from the highest places like the ECB, the DNB. So a lot has happened in these 14 years. And what this also shows to me, having all of you in this room, is how much bigger the SFL is than its members, its staff. It's really the network that we have here. And in that sense, I'm also very happy that we have our international friends coming all the way to Amsterdam. So thanks all for coming. And maybe I also need to apologize a little bit. It was already said, I can be a bit stubborn, I can be a bit pushy. And what one of you said during a little farewell to me was that it was always very nice to interact with Sustainable Finance Lab and with me. But there was also a problem. And the problem is that once they lived up to one of our recommendations, there was one certainty. And that was there was going to be another recommendation. I am sorry, but I am afraid that is how it needs to be. Because we are in a transition. And this is what a transition looks like. Oh, wrongs. Yes, this is what a transition looks like, according to the scientists of transitions. Actually, it's one big blur when you get into the transition. Nobody knows what will happen. And in that sense, that's very hard for a sector like the financial sector, which is all about calculating probabilities, looking at risks. But we are not dealing with risks when it comes to the transition. We're dealing with uncertainty. So how does finance cope with this? How is finance transitioning itself in order to adapt to the reality of a transition? Because the transition is there, whether finance likes it or not. And so I have limited time, so I would have liked to have more memories of things that we have done together, but we'll do that over the drinks. But allow me to go out in style here and put some thorny issues for you on the table going forward. And I have to warn you, it's rather challenging issues. But it are issues that I believe are really essential if we want to keep this world safe for as many people as possible. And it are issues that we can only tackle if we work in the Sustainable Finance Lab way. So with academics, with the sector, with the supervisors, with the NGOs, all together. I cannot promise you an easy ride, but I do promise you that I will try to end optimistic. But before I do all that, let's start with the most fundamental question. Why are we talking about finance? Because surely the transition is something that needs to happen in the outside world, in the real world. So why even talk about finance? Does finance matter? And actually, when I got my training as an economist, the answer was clearly not really. The real hero of economic development, that's the entrepreneur, in the words of Joseph Schumpeter. And the banker is merely a bridge. And it was only about 10 years after I did my study that I started to doubt these lessons. I was at that time working as an advisor to the Dutch government on innovation policies and having conversations with business developers, the heads of R&D labs of big corporations. And these were very nice conversations that I was having with them. So they had great ideas what to do, often very sustainable ideas. But at the end, I noticed that the result was always they were saying, but Rens, of course, we cannot really do this because, well, the rate of return internally is so high, and so there is no money for this. And then I was thinking back about these lessons that I got when I was studying economics. And I thought, this is actually not how it should be. This is not how I have learned this. So that was what stirred my curiosity to go and look into finance. When I started to look more into finance, from an innovation point of view, I encountered a whole different way how you could look into finance. So this is the central image of Carlota Perez. She's a historian looking at innovation. And when she was looking how all the big technological breakthroughs have actually happened since the start of the Industrial Revolution, to her own surprise, she found out that the financial sector played a crucial role. Because when there was a new technology, there were all the incumbent firms who were not interested in that new technology. They didn't really care to exploit it or to further develop it. But it was the capital, the footloose capital, that saw these new opportunities, that had the imagination of what the new technology could bring, and that started to invest massively in those new technologies. Now, this is a completely different idea of finance than the spreadsheet finance that I was taught in university. This is about imagination. And in that sense, finance dealing in self-fulfilling prophecies. So yes, finance matters. Because if finance believes in a sustainable future, then also that future will come. And fortunately, the financial sector, at least in the Netherlands, believes in sustainability. So this is a picture 5 years ago of the Dutch financial sector. All the big pension funds, banks, insurance companies, their board members assembled here to sign up for what is called the Climate Accord, where they committed that they want to be Paris-aligned with their portfolios in how it develops. And this is only 5 years ago. And now we have European regulation, the CSRD, but most importantly also the CSDDD, that actually obliges all companies in Europe, including the banks, to come up with these kind of like transition plans. So not only looking what is the impact from the outside world on us, but also what kind of like impact do we have on the world. And this can make finance an accelerator rather than a brake on the transition. And yes, in the Netherlands, we are almost able to say we as a country are Paris-aligned. Let's hope this government doesn't mess up too much, but it's something we can do, and it will probably do in the next couple of years. And also in the US and in China, it's possible, they have the money. But, and this is where I come with my first challenge, this is not the case in most parts of the world. So what we see is that for instance, in China, in Asia, that's where the CO2 emissions are still increasing. And first of all, of course, this is the result of a very good economic development, of a development where a lot of people have actually been risen from poverty. In 1990, only 30 years ago, 40% of the world population lived in extreme poverty. Nowadays, that's less than 10%, while the world population has grown a lot in that period. So this is very important, and this should not stop. And this shows that in the next decades, we are going to expect to have 2 billion people more on this world. 2 billion people who will mostly be born in the poorer regions, like Africa, like India, where a lot of catch-up growth is going to take place. And they have a choice. They have a choice to make their economic development the way that we did it, and then we can forget about any of the climate or biodiversity goals that we have set. Or they can take another approach. And there is a good potential to make the right choices here. So here we see where the sun is shining, and well, Africa, India, the Middle East, there's a huge potential for renewables. However, if we look where the renewables nowadays are being placed, then that's not in Africa. So I've been told that actually at the moment there are more solar panels in the whole of the Netherlands than there are in the whole of Africa, the whole region of Africa. And there's only one reason for that, and that's where finance comes in. A lack of money. Because even though that nowadays renewable energy often is cheaper than the fossil fuel alternatives, there is a little problem with that. Because that is if you look at the whole life cycle. But to get to the renewables, you need to make a high upfront investment. Once you have your solar panels, the sun shines for free. Once you have your windmill, the wind blows for free. But the investment will cost you dearly. While on the other hand, if you put on a coal-fired power plant, then it's a relatively small investment. And yes, you need to be paying for coal for 30 or 40 years more, and therefore in the end it will be more expensive. But still, that is the choice that maybe that you need to be making. And these countries, they don't have the money. And it's not only because they're poor, but this also, and this is actually what I found the most shocking figure I found when we started to look into this north-south development in Sustainable Finance Lab, is actually a lot of money is flowing out of the poorest countries towards the rich countries. So we have the little green dot out there. That's the aid that we are giving, around 100 billion a year. At the same time, most of the money is actually flowing out of poor countries to the north. It's the rich people there, it's the companies who send their money to the north, and then Africa needs to get that money back if they want to make investments. And they need to pay a very high premium, risk premium, to get that money back. And this has only become worse in the last couple of years, since the Ukraine crisis, since COVID. Prices have gone up, interest rates have gone up, a lot of countries got into debt crisis. So their development, economic development, has essentially stagnated. And over the last couple of years, for the first time in decades, we have seen that the number of people in extreme poverty has been going up. So while the world must accelerate its transition, we are halfway, almost halfway, what is called the decisive decade. A large part of the world simply do not have the resources to do it. Money needs to flow from the north to the south, but it doesn't. Well, this did ring a bell with me. And the bell was that 10 years ago, during the Euro crisis, also all the economists agreed money needs to flow from the north to the south. And all the politicians understood that. But as Jean-Claude Juncker famously said, we understand the economics. We just don't understand how we can get re-elected if we would do that. Which meant that it didn't happen. And still, we still have a euro. There is still a European Union. So what happened? It was the central banker, Mario Draghi, who stepped forward in 2012 and said, I will do whatever it takes to save the euro. Magical words. And with that, he stood in a tradition of central bankers rising to the occasion and at an essential moment use their powers to create money to do whatever it takes. It's a taboo, public money creation, and it's understandably a taboo. But at the same time, it's a taboo to be broken in case of an emergency. And we can, also on the global scale. Because there is this thing called special drawing rights. That's money creation by the International Monetary Fund, even though you're not supposed to call it money creation. But it gives money to everyone involved. And it has been used already. So after the crisis of 2008, $250 billion of SDRs have been created. And again, when there was the COVID crisis, and countries in the south needed money, but the north was actually having its own crisis, special drawing rights were created again, $650 billion at that time. Now, why not create more of those? And why not link those to achievements of countries in terms of biodiversity or climate, and that way create carbon coins or nature coins, allowing these countries to make the investments that they need, lifting them from their liquidity problems. Of course, this is a monetary paradigm shift. This will not happen easily. It will only happen if we understand that the current paradigm is not working, that is actually threatening our mandates. Mandates of making good long-term financial returns for the private parties, or keeping the price and financial stability, like for central banks. And officially, we do not acknowledge that. And one reason why we don't do that is because the official data are not telling us that we are in these kind of really big problems. And that's why I get to my second challenge for today, which already has been touched upon in the panel. And it's about this. These are the NGFS scenarios. They have been touched upon. And they are a great innovation. It's great that they are there. It was for the first time that central banks agreed on the impact of climate change, and therefore could do stress testing with that. And as Frank has also mentioned, what they show is that it's cheaper to be in a net zero scenario than in the current policy scenario. Because the impact of climate change that we will have is going to cost us more dearly than being in net zero. But there is a shadow side, I think, to this. And that's that if I'm a politician and I would look at this, and I had the choice making hard decisions now to get to net zero and being punished by my electorate, or saying, well, I'm not going to do anything, and then we'll end up there in 2050. And of course, it's not nice because we have an impact of almost 40% of GDP that will be lost. But it's only a difference of about 7% with the net zero. So how bad is that really? Because this is 25 years away. 25 years, so that means that the economy will grow by 25, maybe 40%. I can imagine politicians thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't make the effort. And I think the problem is that this model is not really catching all the impacts. It's painting too rosy a picture. And of course, you don't want to take my word for that, but maybe take the word of the Institute of British Actuaries, who had a great report about this earlier this year. And they say that most of the climate scenarios currently being used are implausible, because they are using modeling techniques that exclude many of the most severe impacts, such as tipping points and second-order impacts. It is as if we are modeling the scenario of the Titanic hitting an iceberg, but excluding from the impacts the possibility that the ship could sink. And how can a ship not sink if something like this happens? This is from a study from Nature, where they calculated overall the impact of climate change, and that this is going to 3.7 degrees, will be 23% globally in 2100. But if you look at the different, so 23% in 80 years' time, we can manage that. But if you look at what's happening in these regions, this is almost a complete meltdown of the economy. And this is even excluding the political implications, the social upheaval that this will give. So this is a social drama, and it dwarfs anything that humanity has seen so far. It happens on our borders, and this will impact the mandates of our financial institutions, be it private, if they want to have good long-term returns, and central banks, if they want to keep price and financial stability. In a world like this, that will be very hard, very uncertain, to say the least. And that we cannot model something does not mean that it will not happen. So let me summarize. Finance is the control room of society. Its brain, so you will. It imagines futures and it creates them. And the good news is that in Europe, this is increasingly in a sustainable future. The bad news is, in it is in the world that matters, and the global south has a money problem. Solutions are available, but still a taboo, and will remain so as long as we do not admit the dire situation that we are in. And therefore, it starts by admitting that we are not in control, as it is this feeling that we are in control that keeps us from doing what helps us to bring back control. So this is what I call the paradox of control that finance is in. Only by acknowledging that it is out of control can it actually regain it. And this is not an easy message for executives and professionals that are being paid to be in control, that have supervisors demanding from them to be in control. Now, I promised I would end with an optimistic note, and I'm going to do that. So, how to make this transition? How to find the courage, the word was already mentioned, to go along a difficult path. And recently I had lunch with Herman Wijfels, and he told me that this is actually not the first time that humanity has been in this situation. So 3,000 years ago, it was Moses who went through the desert with his people. And at the moment, he got stuck in the desert. People didn't want to go forward anymore. They lost the faith in the promised land. And when I was on my bike back from our lunch, I thought, but how then did Moses actually convince the people to go forward? So when I came home, I opened the computer and I asked ChatGPT, how did Moses convince his people? And ChatGPT, he knew. He said it was wonders. Wonders had helped. And at first I was taken a little bit aback by that answer. But then I thought, it's true, we are actually having these wonders. And we can take courage from that. So then let me show you the wonders. The wonder, for instance, about how quickly the price of solar PV has come down. In 2010, it was 5 times the price of fossil gas. And 10 years later, it was already cheaper than fossil fuel. Nobody in 2010 expected that. And that's also what you see when you look at the predictions of the International Energy Agency of how solar PV is going to develop. These are the wonders of our time, the wonders of the transition, that we can take courage from. That's what I think. And I think that we as finance have a positive story to tell. That in the long run, there is no trade-off between financial returns and social and natural values. Finance simply needs its social and natural base. And as therefore, there is no problem with mandates, which are long-term. The main thing is that there's a coordination problem, and we are moving there. In that sense, I am optimistic. I see how climate and biodiversity risk awareness is growing. Yes, the go, go, go moment is there, but let's expect that soon. We see that impact goals are being set. Double materiality is even being put into law. I see that public investment banks are getting more and more active. Look at InvestNL in the Netherlands. I see green interest rates in Japan, in China, and I hear ECB board members talk about them here in Europe. And the use of the SDRs, it's also already happening. The thing is, we don't need nothing new, we just need to scale it up. And we need to make that next step quickly. Because, finally, to quote the IPCC, we have only a small and quickly closing window of opportunity to limit climate change. So, speed is of the essence. Now, in my last minute, Dirk, let me thank a few people. Because this is the thinking that you get when you have someone like me, surround him with the brightest minds of the country, give him brilliant staff to work with for 14 years, studying on the implications of the current financial system for sustainability. And I'm immensely grateful to you all for making that possible. For playing your role in transforming so many of the ideas that we have commonly developed into practice. And the ASFL members, they have been a great source of support and inspiration for me, helping me to find the SFL voice, which is starting from the facts and the science, but not afraid to draw conclusions, to be clear, outspoken, and yes, sometimes bold. A special word of thanks to Herman Wijfels and Peter Blom and Thomas Steiner for believing in me from the very start, or at least giving me the confidence. To Arnoud Boot and Dirk Schoenmaker, two incoming chairs that I know I promised them it would not take them too much time to be the co-chair of SFL. And to all our financiers, Triodos Bank to start with, the Dutch Central Bank, both just renewed their commitment to SFL, which is really great. Laudes, Sunrise, without whom we could not have done all this work. And then, of course, there is the staff. Amazing how much we have been able to do with such a small group of people. Thank you so much for your trust, following me, but also guiding me through all these uncharted territories where we have gone. It has been a privilege working with all of you, and there were like 100 reasons I could think of why I wanted to continue. Clearly, from my talk, I hope you take it, the job is not finished yet. But actually realizing what a privilege it is to be the director of Sustainable Finance Lab, I also understood that that's a privilege that belongs with someone who with the freshest of energies and ideas. And after 13 years, I think that's no longer me. So in that sense, I'm very happy that I'm now able to present my wonderful successor, to whom my baby I'm gonna hand over. Almost 14 years old, so in that sense, sometimes a bit of a stubborn adolescent, but a unique and very necessary voice and force in this world. Brenda Kramer already took over on the 1st of June, and I have come to know her as not only super highly motivated, cheerful and energetic, but also very thorough and resolute. As a very hard worker who did her master in economics while already working at the Ministry of Finance during the Euro crisis. Not many people who can say that. And she brings this unique SFL blend of experience in both the public and the private sector, national and international, understanding how things are done, but also now and then how they need to be done. She worked at the European Commission, at the Dutch Central Bank, and since 2016 with PGGM on sustainable finance, where she represented also the Dutch pension sector in the EU expert group and platform for sustainable finance. So very well qualified to lead the SFL into its next stage. Yeah, very happy to pass over the baton. Please, Brenda, come on stage. So, you may have seen it already. SFL is a young organization, so we have very little traditions. Maybe only apart from all the drinks and the dinners that we always organize. Maybe a bit too rude discussion style that we have. But we have no precedent in terms of these kind of like things. And I think Brenda and I, we both watched with a little bit of horror how Mark Rutte handed over very little key to Schoof, little key to a tower that Schoof, I think, within 2 weeks needed to evacuate already. And of course, our access cards of the Utrecht University, that would not make a nice picture. But luckily, I realized that there could be only one baton to hand over for Sustainable Finance Lab. And Frank Elderson, I know he sometimes boosts with the fact that the euro bills are made from organic cotton, which of course is a very important step forward. But still, cotton uses, even organic cotton, a lot of water. So I went back all the way to the Middle Ages to look for the real sustainable finance. And I found the telly stick. Because how more sustainable can you get your money? It's just a stick, you pick it up from the ground, and all you do is you split it in two. So there's one part which is for the debtor. And a big thanks to René Staal, the artist, and my great friend who actually made this for me. So this is the debtor part. And Brenda, this is what you're going to get. Because as a director of SFL, you're indebted to the SFL members and the wider SFL community for being their director. And this part I'm going to hand over to the chair, Dirk Schoenmaker, in a minute. And once in a while you can bring this together. And there's already my 13 carves here. And I only hope, Brenda, that there will be many carves from you here, and that one day you will be able to hand this over to your successor. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought it was going to feel like getting the key to a new house, but I think it now feels like getting a stick to hit financial institutions that don't want to move.
As long as you don't break it.
Yes, I'll be careful. Yeah, my name is Brenda Kramer. I'm not the new Rens, but I do have the privilege to be the new director of Sustainable Finance Lab. I'm really glad, and it feels like an honor to take this position from you. And as Rens said, I have already started the 1st of June, and I had the chance to dive into SFL the past 4 months. And in that period, I found out that the members are extremely committed to its purpose. And they share this circle, this very special circle that you have built, shares a great deal of history together. And it was beautiful to see. I got to know a team that is intrinsically motivated to do good, not only for the world or for the financial sector, but also for each other. They care, they really care. And they care for you. And I found out that Rens has built an unbelievable network of people in the Netherlands and outside the Netherlands, which every week I was impressed by a new connection that was there. And I keep being amazed every week. It'll probably take me a while to see everyone in that network. Yeah, Rens, you already said it. You described SFL as being in puberty. I have good news. Today we're moving out. We are moving out of the house, becoming a student. I like the stick. It feels like you can direct a symphony with it, right? Yeah, but so we're moving into this new phase, and I probably, as good students, we will definitely call you when we need something. You already said you won't do any washing, so we just might just call you for money. Yeah, who knows? No, all jokes aside, Rens, I promise you, your stick, your baby is in good hands, and it won't be just me carrying SFL. Because I believe that the systemic change that we're trying to create will be the result of collective effort. It is a result of creativity, communication, and cooperation. And that's what SFL stands for me, and what I will keep doing. I will use the brain power of its members, the executive power of its team, and the energy of the friends and funders that are here today to build an organization that stands for change, for a world in which people can live in a clean and safe and equal environment. That I promise to you. And I've spoken to many of you, but not to all, but I hope that's going to happen soon. And I can hardly wait for the moment that I can present to you the strategy for navigating SFL through its turbulent student times into a new phase of adultness. But that will take a while, because as you know, if you get the key to a new house, it takes a while before you have built and made it a home. So while we're doing that, you'll have to bear with us. And for now, it just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you to Rens for getting me up to speed. To the board, to the team for your trust, for telling me everything I needed to know. And to all of you for being here. Because it means a lot to Rens, but it also means a lot to us, to me, to the team, and to the members. Thank you.
Dan geef ik jou deze ook, Dirk. En toch heel veel dank.
Dankjewel, Rens. Separate, so we come together. And please stay on the stage. How to summarize this afternoon? I would do that, but how to do that? No, I have another slide. Because you all know, most of you know what can happen to you. You get a phone call from Rens. Would you, in this case, would you write a paper with us, with Herman, with Rens and me? Would you write this paper with us? So you get this phone call, and you first think, well, yes, no, but then in the end, you're part of it and you come to this occasion. So that's how many of us happen to know Rens. So I was not yet part of SFL. Then we did this great paper. And thanks for inviting me, Rens. But I think that's summarizing you as getting to code, to do things, to invite people. And at the time, look at the title, what role for supervisors in addressing systemic environmental risk. And I think that's a summary for today. It's about systemic changes, and quite a few of you said it. I think sometimes we were still hiding behind the government, but I think the real thing is what we should not forget, and I always tell my students at the start of the academic year, the allocation power of the financial system. We decide what we finance or not finance, and I see sitting VBDO, they're telling us if we do a good job in making the allocation job, so we have power, and we make decisions. Don't hide behind the government or behind other people. So in that sense, I share your vision. That's very important. The allocation role, Frank also mentioned the legal obligation from the Paris, which is a binding international treaty. We need policy mix, so in the end, it is a joint multidisciplinary task. And now, I also want to end on two pieces of good news, because Alexander had a hope that Rens would stay. And I have good news, because what happened to me over the last 2 weeks, I got 3 emails. Can you read it and sign? And then I got it last week. All the professors are signing it. Dirk, you should also sign. And then I finally read it and said yes. So Rens is not going to be away. So even this week, published 2 days ago, so Rens will stay in this business. So that's good news. So your hope is fulfilled. And Rens, really thank you for what you all did for SFL. And has already been said, but you have been going and you will be going. So stay on the course. And the second piece of good news is that we have a new director. And what is extremely important, this journey, whether there's the baby or whether it is puber or whatever, but we have a young and energetic director. So I'm extremely happy with a lot of experience. The Dutch Central Bank, but even more importantly, Ministry of Finance, private sector, private sector. So you know how all the corridors of power work. So the whole team, the SFL members, we are really happy that it's a big loss that Rens is going, but that we really continue. And we know, sometimes markets are casinos. So we are now going to double down on sustainability. So, and join us for the drinks. The drinks are next door in the foyer.
Met een stick erbij.